Welcome back to Locked On Blues. We are hosting the Edmonton Oilers, and I know there's a lot of you that still might be wondering, did these offer sheets actually pan out? Well, I'm going to talk to Nick from Locked On Oilers and get his thoughts on that.
Hey, this is Brayden Chen.
Subscribe to Locked On Blues.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this crossover edition of Locked On Oilers and Locked On Blues. Haley and I want to thank everyone who are making our shows their first listen of the day. They're both part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, where new customers can bet $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. So, lots to get to, a whole lot of interesting conversation. There's also the Kasperi Kapanen of it all, which is something I forgot about when I was putting my notes together for today. So let's start here with the very important question. How are you doing today? I'm great. It's always good when you can get another host on to do this, to make the job a little bit easier and a little bit more fun, frankly. It's better than talking to yourself. Crossover episodes are a good tool to have in the toolbox. So let's start with the obvious, the big picture. The Blues are in a weird spot. They have several really good players. They have a weird group that's kind of old, but not that old. How would you assess the direction of the Blues more than anything right now?
The direction is down, and I want to make this very clear that while there are some good players on the Blues, like a Robert Thomas, you could even go ahead as a Colton Parayko, and I'm being a little bit hesitant because he is older. The Blues just have too many older players. And some of the younger guys that they have are just not panning out. We saw them with the trading in Scott Perunovich to the Islanders. Again, players like Tyler Tucker are just not what you need defensively. So this team, it's not a playoff team, Nick. I know this offseason I was hooting and hollering saying, hey, we're going to be going to the playoffs. That is definitely not happening.
It's weird because a lot of teams in their position, in a similar position, would have said, let's bottom out. A lot of teams would have looked around and seen what the Sharks are doing, what the Blackhawks are doing, to a lesser extent, what the Flames did last year, and said, we could get a lot for some of these guys, and we could really put ourselves in a position to start fresh and to put that next wave of young guys in a position to succeed. And instead, they've taken the path less traveled.
It's weird. I'm going to be honest with you. It is weird. Doug Armstrong is the type of general manager that is just so competitive with himself that I think for him, he can't face the reality that this isn't a playoff team. So he's still, in a really strange way, is striving to get there, which is why, again, with some of the trades that they made, I was surprised about that. I mean, trading Scott Perunovich for literally nothing, like a fifth rounder, I believe. You put Saad on offer sheet, not on offer sheets, on waivers, and he got picked up by the VGK. The things that they're doing don't scream to me, hey, let's tank, hey, let's rebuild. It screams, hey, let's get some more money, so some cap relief, so that way we can sign somebody, even if it's for a year, who knows, to help this team go to the playoffs.
And
I mean, you saw that with Ian Fowler. Oh
yeah, I do recall that. It's a weird place to be because you wouldn't say a GM's job is done once you win a championship, but you're kind of bulletproof at that point, and that kind of feels like the situation there, where they've slowly but surely started to lose those guys as time has passed because it's hard to maintain a good team, and guys get older, and that next wave, the young group of guys, it's only a handful. I'm optimistic that Jake Neighbors is going to be a pretty good player, but he's still only 22, whereas most of the rest of that group of guys is, 25, 26, a little bit older. So that brings us to the Oilers connection here and talking about the fit for Dylan Holloway, for Philip Broberg. And the thing that jumped out to me the most when I was putting my notes together was just how much more opportunity they're getting with St. Louis than they did with Edmonton last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dylan Holloway, when it comes to the two players, I feel like he's exceeded the expectations. They've played him all over the first line, the second line, the third line. Yes, he's been on the fourth line too, but he's been all over, but he's been so consistent. And he's one of the best forwards that we have. Now with Philip Broberg, he's been notably on the second pairing. He was on the first for a little bit, but they kind of moved him around, and I feel like he fits best in the second. But again, more opportunity. I will say this, though, about Philip Broberg, and now I see why a lot of the Edmonton fans that commented saying, oh, good luck with him being sarcastic, meant what they said. He isn't strong defensively. What his best assets are is that he's a good two-way player, so he is good offensively. But now I understand, after watching a lot of Philip Broberg, is that defensively there is still some things that he struggles with. Zone coverage, that's a big one. So I get it now, Nick. I was a little too excited, but now I see why that money was a significant amount of money for a player like him. But in terms of opportunity, yes, they are getting a lot more than in Edmonton.
And the problem for Edmonton in this case, and the reason why, especially now that we know that there's going to be more money in the system with cap increases, the Oilers need that next wave of young guys to kind of augment the rising cost of their best players. You know, right now in what was Dylan Holloway's spot is Victor Arvidsson, who's really kind of had an up and down, inconsistent year. Has dealt with more than one injury, has missed a lot of time. And then in the Broberg spot, it's largely been Brett Kulak, who nice player, established long-term NHL player over the age of 30, lots of playoff games, but playing the most minutes he ever has in his entire life at 31 years old. And he's been asked a lot of this season to be the defensively responsible one with Ty Emberson or with Darnell Nurse. And it's really kind of the opposite of what Philip Broberg would have been doing in that role. You know, he got a nice, I guess, moonlight chance on that second pair in the playoffs last year where he played with Nurse on the second pair on his offside, which was crazy to me as somebody who had less than 100 NHL games, had never been in the playoffs before last year. And they were basically telling him, hey, babysit the guy who gets $9.5 million a year on your offside. And it's, if nothing else, it's good for their careers that they're in St. Louis because they're actually getting to play. I struggle to imagine Dylan Holloway playing 18, 19 minutes a night, ditto Philip Broberg on this Oilers team.
The question that I do have for you covering the Edmonton Oilers is, it's out there that the Oilers are one of the oldest teams player average wise in the NHL. Does that concern you about the longevity of how this team can sustain their winning style? Let's go say. I mean, they did make it to the finals last season and they're a cup contending team again this season. But let's go say 3 to 5 years down the line, do you still see this team being just as competitive?
It's a great question. It's something I ask myself a lot, and I've done an episode, more than one episode this season on, because once you get past Connor Leon, Evan Bouchard, and even Hyman's kind of old at this point.
Yeah,
once you get past Connor Leon and Evan Bouchard, not a lot of these guys are going to be here long term. Most of their forward group is 1 or 2 year deals because they're guys who've wanted to stay, who've taken a little bit less, like Adam Henrique, like Jeff Skinner, who hasn't really had a seamless transition either to being an Oiler. It's a fair question. I think the lazy answer and the easy answer is any team that has Connor and Leon is going to be competitive. It's just a matter of how competitive. And that's kind of been the story of their careers. You know, they were really, really good that second season McDavid was in the league. They went to the second round, and then they didn't make the playoffs for 4 years. It's really a good question, and it's something I think we'll talk about a little bit more coming up in our second segment, so be sure to stick around. Chiefs rematch, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling Super Bowl MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field. The app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet, potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, icing on the cake. Haley's Eagles, 1.5-point underdogs in New Orleans. I cannot wait for Sunday. If you want to get in on the action, download the FanDuel app or head on over to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. It's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with Haley and I on this crossover edition of Locked On Oilers and Locked On Blues, continuing the conversation as far as the contender status of the Oilers. It's very volatile is the word I'll use to describe it, because once you start looking at the ages, it really does become a concern. You know, Ekholm's over 30, Nurse is over 30, Hyman's over 30, Nuge is over 30. And then you get to the supporting cast like Adam Henrique and Matthias Janmark and Connor Brown. This is a really, really old team. And year over year, you can't expect guys to maintain what they are. And I think that's an interesting way to tie this back and circle this back to the Blues. What would you say is kind of the goal here down the back half of the season? You know, you bring in a new coach mid-season, and look, I think Jim Montgomery's a really good coach. I think anytime you can bring someone like that in, you figure it out later. But what do you think is the goal down the back stretch of the season here?
I'm glad you asked that question, because this is something I talk about a lot here in Locked On Blues. And the goal is to maybe give some of the younger players a chance. And I'm talking about the guys in the AHL. Dvorsky had an incredible season so far with the Thunderbirds. He was an all-star. And I know that maybe he's not NHL ready, but this is not a playoff contending team. So let him play for a couple games, call him up, and let him kind of get a feel for things. Maybe he will surprise you. Maybe he won't. But at least it gives him something to work with. Same as Simon Robertson. I think for the Blues, you should sell. The deadline is approaching March 7th. It's almost a little bit over a month away. You need to sell. Relief cap space, period. Do not buy. Don't be crazy. You're not a contending team. And this offseason, when there's a lot of players, Nick, I'm sure that you're very well aware that will be free agents. And that's when you begin to buy. You don't do that now. You just sell, and hope that a team takes them. But for the Blues, there really isn't a good answer, because I know what Doug Armstrong's going to do, and he's going to do the opposite of what I just said. I know that's going to happen. He's going to push for them to go to the playoffs. I think it's foolish. I think it's stupid, because what's going to end up happening, and I hate to go in a little bit of a rant, but last season, they were the worst team in the NHL. They got the 16th overall draft pick. Now, while I do like Adam Juracek, he did fall back just due to injury, but he's fine now. You don't want to be that team, especially with this draft. There's not as much talent. You want to be ideally in the top 7, I would say, if you want to get a really solid draft pick that's going to end up panning out.
It's a real conundrum, because these are hyper-competitive personality types who are never going to accept that losing is in their best interest. It's really oxymoronic to the condition to be in that type of role, because these guys have spent their entire lives trying to do whatever they can to win, and telling one of them, hey, it would probably be better if you lost some of these games. It's not the most conducive or easy conversation. I do think, and I want to visit this idea, why do you think both Brandon Saad and Perunovich got squeezed out on a team that, you know, needs guys? It's a weird thing to see a team that basically has nothing to play for, just giving away guys or giving up on guys who are still functional players. You know, Saad's not what he used to be, but he's still a solid NHL player. And Perunovich, you know, I mean, the Islanders are an island of misfit toys, but he's playing right away and he looks decent for them.
So I had a nice one-on-one conversation with Scott Perunovich, and that's on the channel. And we spoke even after the interview via phone, because that was my biggest question. And my biggest takeaway is that the Blues just weren't willing to give him ice time. And the Islanders, I mean, they've had a lot of injuries. Yeah. Gil, who does a great job on Locked On Islanders, covers the team and really explains it well. They were desperate for defensemen. I mean, I hate to be this way, but any team that signs Tony DeAngelo is obviously desperate enough to have anybody at that point. So I think that the Islanders, they liked what they saw from Perunovich. They saw that the Blues weren't playing him. He is a power play specialist. And that's the thing. When Torrey Krug got injured, and we did talk about this, Scott Perunovich was supposed to be the guy that was on the power play. The Blues never did that. They never gave him an opportunity. Do I know why? No. And I know Scott was frustrated when I spoke to him back in October when he came here. So from the conversations that I kind of had with him, I think it's fair to say that the Islanders needed defensemen and they were willing to give him an opportunity. He's played like 25 minutes. He his first 2 games as an Islander, he was able to record 2 assists. So I'm really happy for him, assists in each game. So for Brandon Saad, I don't know. That was the weird one to me. It's not like they were paying him that. I mean, they were paying him a good amount of money. Let's just say for how it is. I think it was too much money. But I don't think he was that bad. Now, do I think that he is the same Brandon Saad that we saw when he won the Cups of Chicago? Absolutely not. But he still contributed it, but I don't think it was to the extent that the Blues were expecting him to be at. So they put him on waivers. He decided to terminate the contract, and the Blues did as well. Vegas picked him up for a lot less money, but I hope things work out for him. We have a lot of former guys go to Vegas, as you know, so who knows? But it's just strange because then Doug Armstrong also said that he's not calling up anybody from Springfield.
It's weird. And we can even throw Kasperi Kapanen into this conversation as well, because the Oilers were absolutely up the creek when they claimed him off of waivers. Like, they were missing like 4 of their top 9 forwards in middle of November when they claimed him off of waivers. And he was just off the plane playing with Leon and Connor that first month because they just had nobody else. And he is a very polarizing player amongst Oiler fans, where it's, you look at him like I do, where he's very fast in a straight line and he's got a very hard shot, but that's basically all he has. And then there are people who look at him and say, why is he even playing? He doesn't do anything. And you have to remember, this is a salary cap sport. Guys are highly specialized. And for what he is, how much he costs, there are far worse things you could have in your lineup. It's really, and it ties into this larger conversation, what we were talking about as far as Holloway and Broberg as well. Sometimes guys just need opportunities, and they're fleeting, and it's not always the most consistent thing in the world. But for what he's brought to the Oilers, I can't really complain.
Yeah, and I've actually watched a couple Oilers games just for fun. And you know what? He does a fine job on the ice. And again, it is the opportunity. He's able to play with some of the best players in the NHL. And I say that out of respect. I truly do. The Edmonton Oilers do have some of the best players in the National Hockey League. And I think for him, I mean, we all know his story, just things going to pan out with the Penguins. Like, there was a lot that didn't work out for him. So he's doing his job. He's not the best player. He's not the worst player, but it is what it is. And he's cheap.
That's the biggest thing for the Oilers. And that's the one competitive advantage they do have, is guys will come here for cheap. If they claim people off of waivers, it's really easy. It's like being in a group project with somebody who gets A's in every class. All you have to do is kind of show up, and they're going to do most of the work. And you just do a little bit. You do your 2 minutes when you do the presentation at the end of the semester. It's a good gig if you can get it, unless you're Jeff Skinner, in which case you can't even get into the group presentation. But that's a different conversation.
Whole different conversation.
All right, we're going to take one more break on today's show. We'll come back. We'll tie a bow. We'll talk a little bit about the game tonight and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this extra Tuesday crossover edition of Locked On Oilers and Blues. All right, it's a regular season game. These are non-divisional opponents. I don't particularly expect much from the Oilers. Just the Oilers for the last 3 weeks have given up the first 2 goals in every game, and some of the games they've come furiously storming back and won, like they did against the Wild. And then you have games like Saturday against Toronto, where you let Toronto get up 3-0 and you get it to 3-3, but you still lose ultimately. It's a weird, the Oilers have played a very weird brand of hockey for the last month.
Yeah, well, let me tell you this little fun fact that might make you feel better. Before the win that the Blues had against the Utah Hockey Club on Sunday, the last win that they had was on January 20th. So yeah, it was an ugly 3-game homestand that they lost all 3 games. It's not been good. Like, this team can't score. They can't defend. The power play sucks. The penalty kill sucks. The face-offs, though, that's the one thing. They do great on the face-offs, but other than that, this team is just struggling.
As far as game-to-game basis, what are you noticing that is either different from years past, good or bad? What's different this year about the Blues than past seasons?
Lack of energy, 100% last season. This team played with more energy. They were more motivated. It seems like when the opposing team scores first, it drains all of the energy out of the Blues. And that's something that they used to not do. They used to come back, be resilient. But this season, it seems like if they don't score first, then they're just done and checked out.
Do you think that's a Craig Berube thing that's not here anymore? Because I know he's kind of a firebrandy personality type that kind of pushes buttons and gets more out of guys. Or do you just think that's, the composition of the team because they know they're not the best in the world? It's difficult for them to mount those types of comebacks.
Yeah, I think these guys are just tired of just being, in a sense, a non-winning team. When I spoke with Jake Neighbors a couple months ago, they just lost to the Ottawa Senators 8-1. It was an ugly loss, to say the least. And I said, they're coming off of losing 3 games in a row. And I said, hey, does it feel like this slump just won't get past you guys? And he said, we're not in a slump. This isn't bad. But it was obviously bad. And I think that this team also is in a little bit of denial that they just can't exceed. I mean, you have Braden Shen, who's coming up on 1,000 games next month, second year being captain, and this team is looking again to have another a very long, that's you guys with the short off season, a very long off season, just due to not going to the playoffs. And a little fun fact for you, the last time that the Blues missed 3 consecutive playoffs was 2005 to 2008. And this will be the second time in franchise history that the team will be missing more than 3 seasons of the playoffs. They've never missed more than that. So next season they kind of have to get back in. But to sum it all up, I'm tired. This team is tired, and I don't think. And I like Jim Montgomery. I know that he's happy to be here. I just think when they fired Craig Berube, they made the biggest mistake possible.
It's a real challenge. I talk about that with Hunter of Locked On Penguins a lot, where they're kind of in the same boat with Mike Sullivan at this point, where he's obviously a good coach. They've won the cups. He's going to be the coach for Team USA at 4 Nations. But at the same time, it's very clear that group of guys just needs a different voice. And at the same time, those guys will still go to war for him. It's a very weird thing. And I think the Blues are a good example of that too, where Berube led those guys from the abyss of being the worst team in the league to winning the cup. Sure, the faces and the names started to change over the last handful of seasons and the DNA of that team no longer present. But at the same time, you accomplish something like that, you don't just get over that. And it's a really risky proposition. And they did get a nice little bump when they had the interim coach last year. But again, this year didn't really carry over that nice little interim bump that Drew Bannister had. And now they're kind of, I don't want to say entirely hopeless, but it feels like barring a player landing there, whether it's a trade or a big free agent, it feels like it's going to be like this for a while.
And I hate to be that person, but I think the Oilers are such a great team to do this comparison with. The Oilers, if you're, let's go say a random player, name a random team, Rangers, since they're trading everybody, on the Rangers, and you have the option between going to the Edmonton Oilers or the St. Louis Blues, you're going to probably go to the Edmonton Oilers because you have a better chance of winning a cup. I think for the Blues is that there's not a lot appealing. I mean, yes, you have Jordan Binnington, who is the starting goalie, by the way, for Team Canada and 4 Nations face-off. So that's cool. And you have Robert Thomas, Colton Parayko, who is also on Team Canada. Colton Parayko, not Archie. But other than that, who do you have? It's not like they have any exciting prospects besides Dvorsky, which, I mean, I'm sure that's going to appeal to some people, like me as a fan, but maybe not necessarily 2 different players. You look at Matvei Michkov on the Philadelphia Flyers in his rookie season. Players probably want to play alongside Matvei Michkov. I mean, you have to look at it as who is actually going to be appealed to the St. Louis Blues. And I don't see any big players wanting to come to St. Louis. I always said the Kachucks maybe one day, but I doubt it will happen.
So I think the elevator pitch, if you were the Blues, is you effectively have to do what the Flames did this year, where you just sign a bunch of guys who need opportunities, guys who just want to play. Someone like Anthony Mantha, who's been riding 1-year contracts for a while now, who just needs ice time. I think that's the path but unless you can trade for a star, that's different. But It's very hard to do that in the NHL because there are so few star players. And when they do become available, they largely can control where they end up. You think about the JT Miller stuff over the last few weeks, where it was basically he really only wants to go to the Rangers. The Patrick Kane a couple of years ago only really wanting to go to the Rangers. Matthew ultimately giving the Flames the verdict of, the Panthers, I think it was the Blues were in that list of teams, but they didn't really have anything they could trade for him. It's a weird place to be in. I do think ultimately your path out of the middle is you got to get one of the guys. You have to get a guy that's a landing spot. I mean, we're not that far removed from the Blues going out there and getting Torrey Krug in free agency and trading for Justin Falk and signing Brandon Saad. When you win, you have credibility and people will want to be a part of that, even if, St. Louis isn't Edmonton or Toronto or Montreal as far as a landing spot.
But I think it's interesting because then you have the teams like the Sharks or, the Chicago. And even though I despise Chicago, they have obviously Bedard. The Sharks, Celebrini, Will Smith, they have different players that do have that value. And that's the problem when you're a middle team. You don't have any of those exciting type of players that you get from the previous draft that are ready to go. You don't get that. So it is frustrating. Even Anaheim. Anaheim's a really strange team. I feel like the Trevor Zegras hype kind of stopped. That's just my opinion. But again, they still get
They traded his best friend. They traded his best friend to the Flyers. He's never going to be the same. They traded Jamie Drysdale and he's cooked.
Jamie actually a couple of days ago about Trevor and just a little check-in. But it's just a very weird situation where the Blues just don't have a name. I mean, let me ask you something. Hypothetically, this is all hypothetical. Let's go say Robert Thomas was the player that I was trading. If you're the Oilers, would you be interested in him?
Very much so. Robert Thomas is, I don't want to say an elite player, but a very good player, someone who on the fringe of representing Canada in international competition, someone I think can be easily a 70, 80 point forward on a good team. It's just a matter of the opportunity. And as a center, he probably has to shift to the wing if he were to play for Edmonton, but that's a really good player. The top 4 or 5 guys on that roster are really good. I really like Kyrou. I really like Robert Thomas. I've always liked Buchnevich. They have just enough high end talent that it's impossible for them to be as bad as they need to be. It's really a rock in a hard place.
So I'm glad that you said that about Robert Thomas, because that's the one player I use as example that if I was another player in the NHL, I would be excited to play with him. I think the problem is that, and maybe this is just a universal hockey problem, the first 2 lines, everyone always wants to make sure they look really good, they're strong and dominant. It's the third and fourth lines that don't have enough star talent. And I know that you're not going to sign a star player to play on the third and fourth line, but you do notice that. I mean, maybe not the Oilers, but just in general, some other teams, that you have a really strong first 2 lines and then the bottom 2, it's kind of like, oh, your bottom 6. It doesn't really matter, but it does matter at the end of the day.
That's kind of the differentiation point between the good and the really good teams is, do you have enough good players that your third line is dangerous? I mean, the Oilers' third line on paper should be dangerous. Doesn't have a lot of goals when you add up Adam Henry, Connor Brown, and Janmark.
I like Connor Brown, though.
He's for what he is, he's very good. But they don't have enough depth scoring. That's the Oilers' issue this year. Connor, Leon, Bush, it's great. You can't win with just 3-4 guys scoring all your goals. Though, I mean, Corey Perry has the 4th most goals on this team. And he's, he plays 8 and 9 minutes a game and he takes 2 shots per game. It's crazy.
There is a comparison that we actually can do. Which 39-year-old is better, Corey Perry or Ryan Suter?
Oh, Corey Perry. That's not even a conversation. I was going to say, I mean, God bless Ryan Suter. Has he hit 1,000 games yet? Is that why he's still playing? Is he trying to get to 1,000?
I think he's over it, honestly.
He's almost at 1,500. My goodness. Yeah.
No, Suter, I will say this. There was a period of time that he had to play alongside Colton Parayko because of just injuries and just a bunch of people being out. And he played some really good hockey. He was our best defenseman. He played the most amount of minutes on the ice. Like, Ryan Suter is getting along with people in the locker room. No, I know you're laughing, but he's a problem. Like, at least on other teams, he's been a problem.
Yes, he has been.
He was even like, I was in the locker room one day and he was asking me about cheesesteaks. And I'm like, wow, this is a really nice guy. So, no, I know that obviously.
Is he the
Corey Perry's
personality
better.
hire? Is that why he's there?
I think they were just desperate to get a defenseman, and he ended up being the team's key guy. It's weird. I mean, I feel badly because Cam Fowler too. I mean, he's older, and again, like I just don't see them being here long term, obviously. But it's bad when your best defensemen are all kind of 32, 39.
All right, one last question before we get out of here. We're already over on time, but it is an important question. How do you feel about the succession plan that's been laid out here as far as GM?
It's interesting to say the least. I love Steiner, and I think he's going to do a great job. Obviously, he's really good when it comes to scouting prospects, and I trust him. I mean, he did help us win a cup. It's weird though, because I know that for Doug Armstrong, this will be such a huge transition for him. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure he's going to obviously give good guidance, but it's just weird. Usually you just kind of do a switch, but not with this plan. It's kind of like he's going to be mentoring me and following me, and it's just a little strange, but at least Doug won't be able to make any more problems happen.
It's weird because we've seen that kind of arrangement come together. You know, that's kind of why the Patriots didn't work this year, was they were supposed to do that last year. And the team was so bad, Belichick kind of didn't have the time to help Gerard Mayo kind of figure out how to be a head coach. I mean, you're not wrong. We've lived under the Bill Belichick reign of tyranny long enough, but it's unique. And I do think it's something I'll be curious to see if more teams are willing to try going forward.
Probably not.
You're probably right.
They shouldn't do it. Like, I mean, another example that I can give is the Flyers. When Chuck Fletcher got relieved of his duties, thank God, and Danny Briere and team stepped in, boom. That's what they needed. They didn't need any guidance from Chuck. They just needed to kind of do their own thing. Having a fresh pair of eyes, and this is with any job.
Yeah.
Like sometimes people watch our shows and they give us feedback. It's because we do it every single day. And maybe somebody else is like, hey, you know what? Maybe you should do this differently. I think that if there's too much control to the previous person in power, I know we're just talking hockey, but and then that immediate switch, it could work out really good. Or it could be, it's a little shaky, but that person will eventually figure it out.
I definitely agree. It's one of those things where sometimes if a team is in one, under one person for a really long time, it really would benefit from a fresh set of eyes from an entirely new perspective. Otherwise, and that always doesn't work. You could end up like the Giants, who did that, where they only hired people who had worked for the team for 40 years. And then they hired Joe Shane from the Bills, and that hasn't worked either. So Sports are weird. Sports are weird. There is no one answer.
Sports are so weird.
Because it's the human condition and competition. There's a lot to unpack, but that's a different podcast. All right, that'll do it for this crossover edition of Locked On Oilers and Locked On Blues. Haley, if you want to plug your show, I'll come back and plug mine after you.
All right. Thanks again for watching Locked On Blues. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Locked On Blues. Also, Twitter at Locked On Blues as well. And if you're listening, hopefully you're not driving. If so, make sure you get home safe and then go to your handy dandy phone and search in Locked On Blues and make sure to hit that subscribe button as well and give us 5 stars.
Yes, please. What Haley said, always leave 5-star reviews, always subscribe to content, people. That means a whole lot. It helps us out immensely towards the end of the year. That stuff's important. I will check in with you guys after the game tonight against the Blues. I'll talk to you guys then.